two presentations for this session. We are going to hear about transplantation in PSC and about mental health in living with chronic disease. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Nazia Selzner. She is a transplant hepatologist and medical director of the Living Donor Liver Transplantation at Ajmera Transplant Center at UHN, an associate professor of medicine at the University of Toronto. She is also scientist at the Institute for Medical Science in Toronto. Dr. Selzner graduated from medical school at the University of Paris, France, completed her gastroenterology training in France. She completed her PhD at the University of Paris, France, after 4 years of research fellowship at Duke University and the University of Zurich, Switzerland. Her research interest is in the mechanism of ischemia, reperfusion injury in the liver. Her clinical research is focused on increasing access to liver transplantation and living donor liver transplantation. She is a recipient of numerous national and international awards and has published extensively in the area of living organ donation, transplantation, and reperfusion injury, and is the current president-elect of the International Liver Transplantation Society. And we are very lucky to have her here today on a Saturday, so thank you very much. And I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Mary, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's really nice to see so many of you here, so many of you that I know from having as patients, as donors, and crossing through the road, so many colleagues, and also make connection with so many new faces. And it's really a pleasure to be here. So I thought that I will talk about liver transplantation a little bit in general, what we do in Ajmera Transplant, and also talk more about living donor liver transplantation and take maybe some of the questions about how a living donation happens, how do the donors survive after giving so much of their liver, take some of the myth and questions away from that, and then at the end I will focus a bit about what we know in terms of transplantation for PSC and a little bit of the outcomes, acknowledging that, you know, this is ongoing research and ongoing progress, and the field is moving on. So, sorry, clicking. Wrong way, clearly. Okay. Of course, I have no conflict of interest. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about liver transplantation, first of all, here in Toronto at Ajmera Transplant. We have been, over the last few years, one of the largest North American liver transplant centers and consistently ranked somewhere around second to fourth in North America. And since we started the first transplant in 1985 until end of 2022, we are very close. We have passed 4,000 liver transplantation in our program with 700 adult, 4,700 pediatric transplantation. And as you can see, the program has been growing over the years. The yellow graph shows adults with deceased donor. The green part shows adult with living donor and the pediatric transplant. So, okay, clearly. Okay. And then I wanted also to bring up to your attention that, you know, we do transplantation for all kinds of diseases. For all kinds of diseases, and this is a little bit a snapshot of our makeup of our waiting list for transplant in January 2023. This makeup changes, but the percentage roughly remains the same. So, and I'm going to show you the next slide, so just pay attention a little bit here. The green part is hepatitis C. Hepatitis C used to be a big deal 10 years ago, and it has changed. It used to be 30% of our waiting list. Now it's down to 20%. The blue part is alcohol-associated liver disease. One of those lighter gray is the new kid on the block, which is the non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. I should use the new terminology that's called MASH. Basically, it's fatty liver-induced advanced liver disease. And then the PSC represents 10% of our transplant program. And then next to it is their little sister, PBC, that's 3%, autoimmune, 1%. So that's the makeup of our program as of January. And if we go back now and look at 2012, which is exactly 10 years ago, you see that there has been some changes, but not that much changes in terms of PSC. So clearly, hepatitis C has gone down, NASH is going up, PSC was around 6%, is now 10%. It's a little increase in terms of our activity. And we do believe that this increase is related to our partnership with the Toronto Center for Liver Disease, which allows us to have referral a lot earlier at a proper timing for transplant that is not too late for this recipient because there is expertise and there are doctors who know about what's the right timing about transplant, because that's the key. When is the right timing to refer a patient for transplantation? Not too early, not too late. If you refer too early, they will receive immunosuppression unnecessary for too long. If the referral is too late, then it's too late. So that's knowing the right timing is very important. How is our program looks like in terms of our outcome? This is again looking at some of the diseases for which we do transplant. PSC is the purple graph, and you can see it's one of the diseases that has the best outcome in terms of long-term survival of the patients. That's the graph looking at 12 years after transplant. The outcome of post-transplant is excellent. Now, let's move a bit the stage and talk about how do we get a transplant. If someone needs a transplant, what is the way to get a transplant? Obviously, they need to come to a transplant center, be assessed, go through all the other tests, make sure they are otherwise healthy, they can receive a transplant, and then we put them on the waiting list for transplant. And I want to clarify that everyone who needs a transplant, whether it's a child or an adult, have to go on the waiting list for transplant. There is no way to bypass the liver listing or the wait list for transplant. And then according to the several parameters from their blood work, they will receive a score that's called MELD score, sodium MELD score. And the score is calculated based on 4 parameters. They are very objective. There is no subjective parameter in there. Bilirubin, that looks at how effectively the liver excretes bile. Creatinine, the measure of kidney function. INR, parameter of clotting that is synthesized by the liver. And sodium, serum sodium. This goes through a formula, very complicated formula, and the formula generates a number that is as low as 6, 8, and as high as 50, and around that 50 mark or 40 something, it plateaus, it doesn't go any further up. And the allocation of the organs are based on this score. So the higher someone's score is, the more likelihood they have to attract the organ from the cadaveric pool of patients, donors who passed away. And the reality is that in Toronto, patients who have a score around 30 are the ones that are actually, or higher, are the ones that are attracting the organs. The non-reality part, or the real reality of it is that autoimmune patients in general, particularly PSCs, it's very unusual for them to have a score around that mark. because this score is more reflection of serum sodium, more reflection of creatinine, therefore more reflection of what we call portal hypertension, as opposed to the function of the liver and the excretion of the bile, all these things that goes with the disease PSC. So our PSC patient develop infection, cholangitis, their score will go up a little bit, but then they down again, up and down again, and often when they come for transplant and have clear indication for transplant, their score is somewhere around 15 to 16 or 18 or 20 maybe, but nowhere close to where they can attract a cadaveric organ. Because of that, in 2000, I can't even claim I was there. I wasn't even in Toronto at that time, so I have no claim to this victory, although I wish I could. The leadership in our program, the transplant program, came together and they say, we need to find another path. We need to make sure that our patients who have a MELD score that is not too high can receive a transplant and survive, because otherwise they would stay on the waiting list and they will never have access to transplant. And therefore, the idea of creating living organ donation has started. Some of our surgeons went to Korea to learn about living donor liver transplantation at that time, because in Asia, in many countries in Asia, actually, that's the only way where someone can attract a transplant and have a transplant. Disease donation doesn't exist based on the religious belief. So they went to Korea and they started this program that has grown over the years. And I want to show a few pictures of the, really go back down the memory lane. On the left-hand side, you have this father in the wheelchair who donated to his daughter. And the three guys on the upper, standing behind him, are the three surgeons that were involved in that case. Dr. Gregg, Dr. Supira, and Dr. Cattrall. Some of you may know Dr. Cattrall. I mean, who doesn't know Dr. Cattrall in Toronto, who has been ever to transplant or heard about living donation? And those who know him may not recognize him as being the same Dr. Cattrall in this picture down here. He had a bit more hair, darker hair, but personality-wise, he hasn't changed, the same Dr. Cattrall. So this father donated to this child, who was at that time a baby. On the upper picture is in the middle, had biliary atresia, another disease of childhood, and the daughter has grown up. She is 25 or 26 years of age now. She finished university. She's doing extremely well. That's her dad, the donor, next to her. And Dr. Supira, who was the pediatric surgeon at that time involved. And of course, Dr. Cattrall, and that picture was done when we celebrated the 1,000 living donor liver transplant in Toronto. So this is our program in Canada, in Toronto. We are the largest, that's the red bar. I don't think we need to look further much or look at the numbers. You can see we are the largest living donor liver transplant program in Canada. We have Dr. Cattrall. We have Chantal. A lot of you know Chantal. I have dealt with Chantal. She's our amazing transplant coordinator from the liver donor side, who is really communicating with everyone. And we also now have Elena. I looked for a nice picture of her, a headshot. I couldn't find a nice one, but we have a picture of her at the very end, so you will not recognize. And that is when we did 1,000 life saves, and more are coming. This is now the program, the Living Donor Program. Again, started in 2000. Up to last year, we have now passed 1,150. We are now going to be very close. I think sometimes early next year we will do 2,000. 1,200. We can celebrate again. Again, you can see how the program has grown over the years, and went from a program that was doing only 10 or 8 or whatever, 20, 30. And now we are consistently doing 80 or higher living donor in Toronto and offer both for adults as well as the kids. Our philosophy in Toronto is that live donation should be offered to almost all recipients, that it reduces the risk of waiting and perishing on the waiting list for transplant. And we also truly believe, and we have data that supports that the outcome is similar to receiving an organ from a deceased donor, and even better so because access is faster and the recipient don't get as sick while waiting for an organ. What is the criteria to be a living donor? So anybody who is between the age of 16 and 60 can become a donor, as long as they are healthy and they have no major comorbidities. We accept people who have a BMI below 35, and they have to have a liver statosis or fat in their liver that is not beyond, above 10%. Around 8-9% is our limit. And we have made progress in that limit because initially our limit was about 5%. Now we are becoming a little bit more experienced, and we know that up to 10% is okay to go ahead. They have to be ABO compatible, but it's not absolute, and there are ways to go around that. And the donor should be able to provide informed consent. That is very, very important. The living donor team in Toronto is separated from the recipient team, so we really focus on the donor and their safety and ensure that they are really remaining safe throughout the whole processes. We obviously care very much about the recipient, but we also have our duty toward those donors. We have multiple meetings throughout the week. We have the imaging meeting, we have the Friday meeting where we go through all the donors who are on the workup, look one by one at where we stand, discuss potential issues. We have a checklist that we follow very carefully. We have bioethics that we consult and are there for us whenever we have a question regarding ethics. We have psychiatrists involved. We have a disaster plan, obviously. And we have a partnership model with the recipient team while we are trying to keep staff as much separated as possible. So this is a study that shows the outcome of the living donor liver transplant versus deceased donor liver transplant that we did a few years ago and was now published in our program with 20 years follow-up, because in 2000 we started. We have 20 years follow-up of the recipient of these organs, and this basically shows now some of the characteristics, and then I show you the outcome. So you can see that during that period, we have done 668, these are just adults, and we compare them to 1,596 deceased donor liver transplantation. And you can see that, PSC is in red, is the etiology where, in contrast to other etiologies, the one that have the most number in terms of percentage of living donation transplant done through living donation as opposed to deceased donor liver transplantation. And when we look at the outcome of the recipient up to 20 years of follow-up, you can see there is really not much difference. The outcome is equally good, a little better in favor of live donor liver transplant. And certainly, if we look at the results from the time a recipient is put on the waiting list and analyze the data, their outcome is even better, because when you look from the standpoint of where they go on the list, and take that period of time, which could be short or years in some instances, then definitively the benefit would be to receive a living donation transplantation. I also want to talk about an aspect of our program that is perhaps unknown to some of you and raises a lot of questions and inquiries and curiosity about that, and that is what we called altruistic, anonymous living donor liver transplant. It started all with this man in 2005. He came forward and he said, I want to donate a piece of my liver to someone on the waiting list for transplant, and I don't want to know who that person is. You pick that person. 2005, I have just arrived to Toronto. Again, I cannot take credit. I wish I can, but I was a fellow at that time and just doing my fellowship. But I do remember that it created a lot of buzz because we really didn't have any platform or any processes to consider. And why would someone want to donate a part of their liver to someone else on the waiting list that they don't know? And he said that he asserted that he has the independent ability to make well-informed decision, and saving life is the most important human and healthcare system value. And you don't have to be biologically or emotionally related to a recipient in order to be able to donate to them. Because of TEAM, things changed. And we have to bring in a whole group of experts, stakeholders, etc., including the ethicists, including the psychiatrists, etc., to create a framework as to how we deal with this. And this was published, the result of this framework, and up to now, it's used as the framework in the US, where the anonymous living donation or altruistic liver donation has started to grow as well. And it's all based on donor autonomy, donor risk, and donor benefit. And that's the framework. The framework is in the way that the result has to be excellent for the recipient. It has to have also a positive psychological benefit for the donor. Altruism per se is a legitimate motive, and willingness to donate to a stranger is not necessarily a sign indicative of psychopathology. That comes out all the time. What is with this individual that they want to donate to someone they don't know? And again, these are some of eligibility criteria to work out this anonymous or altruistic liver donor. I'm not going to spend too much on it. And the thing I wanted to focus is how this program has grown over the last few years. Again, we started with one case in 2005. And sorry, the slides are a little cut, but this is before 2000. Everything where the hash line is basically before 2018 and afterwards. And you can see the program has grown by 100% in the last 4 years, despite the COVID problems that we had, despite the fact that people were all at home and we had the problems related to COVID. And we have done now 123 anonymous living donors. And we analyzed their psychopathology, their psychosocial and personality trait. This is all published, and we know that these people are really scoring very high when it comes to agreeableness, consciousness, and scoring very low in neuroticism. And they really truly believe that they are doing this as a moral duty, and they are giving back, acknowledging that they had themselves a privileged life and they want to share this by giving back. And they also feel an impact in their own life. They are less fearful of what can happen in the future. Their entire experience was a way to find their own body, etc. So where is the impact of this anonymous or altruistic donors? They help us to use their organs for the group that we think are disadvantaged. And those are pediatric recipients, because the reality is we don't have enough pediatric donors. For recipients who are smaller size and therefore they may not receive the organ from a cadaveric pool, and also for the group that we called autoimmune related liver diseases, PBC, PSC, etc., that as I explained earlier, their sodium MELD score is not high enough for them to attract the organ. And it also facilitates in our program exchange, paired exchange. So if there is ABO incompatibility between donor and recipient, we can do this paired exchange, meaning that a donor would give to someone else on the waiting list, and the donor of that particular recipient can donate to another recipient with a similar blood group. And that is the case of this couple here. She actually was the anonymous donor, and then they eventually met together, who donated to this particular recipient on the picture, and his wife donated to someone else. And the anonymous living donation, autonomous altruistic donation has grown significantly. Heather is one of the really donors who spearhead this. She's done a fantastic job, and these are they call themselves the group of chopped livers. And we are truly, truly, truly grateful to all the works that they are doing. Now, let's talk a little bit about liver transplantation for PSC, particularly living donor liver transplant. This is one of the newer studies that was just published this year using the American data from the UNOS registry that collect all the data from all the transplant centers and include 5,400 transplant for PSC in all the centers, and 14% of those transplants were done through living donation. And you can see the difference between our program and US, because the percentage of transplant by living donation is still very low and is rising now in the US, but still it shows that they are not very they are very careful in terms of living donor liver transplantation. And this is some of the characteristics of the patients in terms of their age, the recipient, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, again, deceased donor comparing to living donors. And you can see really what is the major difference is in terms of the score, MELD score, although it's not a very good score for the PSC, but those who get a deceased donor liver transplant have higher MELD score in average for this database study compared to the living donor liver transplantation. And when the MELD score rise, it's often when the PSC patient start developing also symptoms of portal hypertension. And then they looked at the outcome, both patient on the left-hand side and graft data comparing diseased donor liver transplantation to living donor liver transplant. Living donor is in red, deceased donor is in dotted line. And you can see the 1 year, and this is 10 years follow-up, is 82% and 95% for living donation, and is not much really less in terms of disease donation. Really emphasizing, again, the very good outcome post-transplant in terms of both patient and graft survival. Now, PSC recurrence post-transplant, it's a reality, it can happen. The rate of recurrence is anywhere from 15 perhaps to 20, 25% in various studies at 5 and 10 years post-transplantation. We don't know really the reason for the recurrence, and there are many, many, many factors, including donors and recipient risk factors for recurrence that have been reported in the literature. Are they perfect? We don't know. The pathophysiology of this recurrence is unknown. And this is, again, some new study from the European registry, ELTR, with 1,500, again, PSC patients that have been transplanted, and they looked at the rate of recurrence. The purple side is the recurrence within the first 5 years. The gray area is after 5 to 10, and then the green is after 10 years. And while the outcome perhaps is a little, not perhaps, is lower at 15 years post follow-up, is lower in those who have an earlier recurrence, around 62%. Definitively, when recurrences happen after 5 years and definitively 10 years, the gap between those who have recurrence and non-recurrence closer, and the outcome could be as high as 76% when the recurrence happen at 10 years and beyond. Now, around a few years ago, there has been a study from Japan that have created some steer regarding the impact of living donor liver transplantation in recurrence of PSC. They reported some data that shows that if you have a living donor first degree, the outcome in terms of recurrent PSC may be worse. And around that time, we in Toronto, we were part of this A12 study, which is the adult-to-adult live donor liver transplant study. That it was a big consortium in the US and brought together many, many transplant centers. And we gave them our data, and they collected all the data from all the centers, both for living and deceased donor liver transplantation. And they looked at the outcome post-transplant according to the type of donors. Bottom line is that there was no difference in terms of recurrence of the disease depending to the type of graft. So if you get a disease or a live donor first degree or not first degree, it's no difference really. So I think summarizing, living donor liver transplant is the focus of my talk today. I hope I have taken some of the myths away for some of you. Definitively reduced death while we're waiting for the transplant. At the end, this is our mission. When it's performed in the high volume center is very safe, and short and long-term outcome of the recipient is very identical to the deceased donor. And with this, I want to thank our team, because we have a very small team in reality, and these are the surgeon. The surgical director is Dr. Cattrall. Many of you know him. He was involved in the very first case. He's still involved in the case 1,200 personally, and he is really devoted to the success of this program, and all the other surgeons, and also our phenomenal Chantal and Elena, who are really helping us in everything we are facing with on a daily basis to bring this program and make sure that everything runs smoothly. Thank you.
Questions after the next talk. Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Selzner. We're going to have our next presentation and then do questions after. So please welcome Dr. Sarah Ahola-Kohut, who is a psychologist. She's a clinical and health psychologist with the IBD Center at the Hospital for Sick Children and an assistant professor with the University of Toronto. As a psychologist, Dr. Kohut has trained and worked in hospitals, community mental health centers, and private practice, providing psychological consultation, assessment, and treatment to people living with chronic health conditions and their families. Her research aims to develop behavioral therapies and programs to support the resilience and quality of life of people with chronic health conditions. And I welcome Dr. Kohut with great emotion, because we've talked a lot about the liver and the gut, and I'm glad we're going to talk about our emotions and our brains too.
Am I going to be able to figure out the clicker? Yes. Which button?
The right, arrow to the right.
Okay. See if I can figure this out. Okay. I just want to thank everyone for being here. And I almost want to just start off for a moment. And can we just recognize how awesome this is? Look at all the people in the room. I was struck by just how beautiful the windows and the ceilings are and everything, and to see all the humans in this one space. And I think we don't take enough time to just pause and check in and enjoy some of the good stuff and let it actually really steep in. Okay, so I like starting all of my talks with, I will say this, my slides are a little cutesy because despite the fact that I do get to work with grown-ups as well, I think we can all adopt a little bit of awe and wonder and that energy of that toddler. I think it would do us all a little good. So our brains are wired to survive and to socialize. So what that means, and I say this as an optimist, happiness is not our default state. So if you are not happy, that does not mean there's anything wrong with you, and it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. Because the default state, honestly, is safety. So when things aren't going right, I think maybe instead of thinking, what am I doing wrong, or why can't I be like all these people on Instagram and everywhere and all the socials, it's what can I do to feel safe, right? And I think we need to acknowledge that, well, one, we're all coming from this weird, awkward, post-pandemic world where everything around us was threatening, and even the idea of being around people was threatening. And that is the exact opposite of what our brains are really craving. I also think the minute anyone gets diagnosed with a chronic disease, it's like this slap in the face where most people get to walk about the world assuming and thinking they know what's going to happen next. And then once you get a diagnosis, that is gone. So I say this more just so that people can be a little easier on themselves and take that little extra time to care for yourselves and think about what would actually make you feel safe and who makes you feel safe. Because again, as humans, we were never meant to be alone. If we were, there's very few people in the world, if you've ever watched the TV show Alone, they usually don't last more than, I think the record's probably 100 days. We were meant to be with people. And when you are dealing with fatigue, pain, itching, all those things, that gets in the way. And I say this as an optimist, it's more about just giving yourself some grace, being able to recognize that this is a thing, and figuring out how best to care for yourselves. So, okay, what does this look like? And I really genuinely see this as like a choose your own adventure. And it's not that there's one right way and then the rest of the ways are wrong. So really, it's how do you pull this together in a workable way for you? So relaxation. For some folks, that's literally like, okay, I'm gonna take a bath, I'm gonna have a book, there's gonna be candles. Others, that's like, no, I'm gonna go get out, get into nature, and walk, right? For some people, well, I will say this, I am super into mindfulness. And I'm a mindfulness enthusiast. And I know for some people, the minute I say that, their eyes are already rolling. And here's the thing, certainly mindfulness can be sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed, does wonderful things for the structure and function of your brain. Who has time for that? Not very few people. I really commend the folks who have time for it, because even myself, someone who teaches it, I go on retreats, I do the things, I really struggle. So the way that I incorporate mindfulness into my life is more like, how can I level up what I'm already doing anyway? And what that might look like, working in GI, I focus a lot on mindful eating, right? So how often when you're eating, are you kind of, even thinking about it from this perspective, I love coffee. It makes me very happy. I'm not a morning person. And I allow myself time in the morning to sit there and not only enjoy my coffee, but recognize I am drinking sunshine. Literal sunshine. It took the sun, it took the rain to grow, and I am not a green thumb, so it took farmers to help get these glorious coffee beans into my coffee machine and into my tummy, and it is so lovely. And I allow myself, just even if it's only the first sip, it's about allowing yourself that. Or if you're eating a meal, perhaps eating a meal in silence without the TV or your phone in front of you. And when I mean like eating your food, actually pay attention to the food that's in your mouth. Don't already be preparing the next spoonful. And here's the thing, again, very hard to have enough time to do that. So one of the ways that I get around this, especially if I am at work, is I put myself a timer. If I've got 3 minutes, it's 3 minutes. So to me, mindfulness is allowing myself 3 minutes to enjoy whatever I'm eating. And mindfulness is knowing that after that 3 minutes is over, I allow myself permission to shovel just the rest of it in my mouth, and that's okay, and get back to work. It can really just be one bite. So when I say mindfulness, I really invite everyone to see it in not just that traditional way that a lot of folks talk about, but also how can you incorporate it into the things that you do, right? Social connection. This, right here, right now, certainly. And also, I want to recognize that for some people, they have a certain amount of social battery. It's what each individual needs and what can be fulfilling for them. And for some, especially those who are socially anxious, maybe doing this online and not in person is the way to go. It's really sorting through some of that. Feelings. I'm a fan of feelings. I don't think any of them are really good or bad, right or wrong. I think what you do with them can get you into trouble. But thinking of how you care for your feelings. What does that look like? What do you do when you're feeling really anxious? And this is around figuring out if you're the type of person who really wants to be in that space, allow yourself that to be anxious and sit with it and breathe through it. Or maybe you're the type of person who finds that really challenging. Put on a really scary movie or a song that has that many beats per minute, because that allows you to experience it kind of by proxy through the movie, where maybe it feels a little safer than recognizing it in yourself. And movies end. And oftentimes that can allow you that space to also let go of some of those feelings. So you're still feeling them and processing them, but it can feel a little bit safer. I think as well, when it comes to feelings, it can also be around working them through your body, whether that's through, that can also be through exercise. It can be through meditation. It's just around where can you acknowledge it and how do you work through it in a way that to you is, I don't love the word acceptance because I feel like it always feels like resignation. So I prefer thinking of it as a willingness and what can help you open up to a willingness to experience. Because at the end of the day, as much as you try to distract yourself or run away, you can't outrun this, it's already here. And in terms of pain, and I think with pain in the context of liver disease, itch could go just as well here, or fatigue. I think it's around, again, when are those moments where I'm not going to knock distraction? I think sometimes it works really well. And knowing when to distract versus when to do something for yourself, and what might it look like to care for pain or to care for yourself. Again, there's no right or wrong here. It's around figuring out for you what's going to be workable. Oh, I got a little excited. So again, and for this entire slide, I want to really have the front and center, this is not me trying to silver line anything. I'm not a silver liner. When things are bad, I think it's totally okay to be like, oh, it's bad. This is not good. And sitting with that. I think it's more of an invitation to recognize that our brains are wired towards negativity. And just because of the world we've lived in, and especially not only in the past week, but I think in the past couple years, we are wired to notice everything that's going wrong. And by virtue of how strapped the medical system is and how often medical teams don't have a ton of time, there's just, the wait lists are long, the clinics are huge now. there isn't as much time to figure out what's going right. So asking yourself, what is going right? I think it helps us work with that negativity bias, and we have to do this purposefully. And we have to make those connections on purpose over and over again to kind of work with that bias. And part of that, like I said, letting yourself just delight. I love the word delight. Like if you think about it, what would it be like to just allow yourself to delight in what, if it's a good book, like delight in a book, or if it's even a funny TikTok or whatever are the things in your life that bring you joy. Like, let's just like steep in that, even if it's just for a second longer, right? I'm also a gratitude junkie, and I force my children to list their daily gratitudes every day before bed. I will tell you this was very painful as they were younger, and my little year over year, now you ask my kids at any point, what are you grateful for? They'll start whipping off things like this, right? And they're often ridiculous, and that's fine. Again, this is more with the intention of acknowledging that we will have this negativity bias, and how do we work with that? I also high-key loathe the word but. In any sentence anyone has ever said, anything lovely you say, and then the word but comes in, everything is forgotten, and it's only whatever comes next. And to me, it's more about acknowledging and both. And if you think about situations in your life, it's those moments when you're crying and laughing at the same time. So I really encourage everyone to think about what even that small difference would make, where every time you would use the word but, just throw in an and see how that might impact your day-to-day. This is all about progress and permission, not perfection. I don't know, I think about now where we're at, and I just don't know how it became such a flex and so impressive to just be busy and have too much on your plate. That's somehow like a status symbol. I don't get it. And at the same time, I recognize that it's part of what lots of people do and is almost an expectation. Really and truly, it is okay to take a sick day. Take the sick day, take the half day, take the time. It is okay to take care of your needs. Mental health days are okay. You don't always have to rally. And I think taking your time and taking time off does not make you lesser than. It really doesn't. Because again, busyness and productivity is not the same thing as success. And there are people who are not going to show up for you. There's lots of them. You know what? There are going to be people who will. And just let the others just find less. And that just let them. Let them be wrong. And I think ultimately, I think of boundaries in a couple different ways, because boundaries are really hard and saying no is really hard. I think of boundaries, A, as self-compassion first and foremost, and B, if you're ever having a hard time saying no to people, remember that's the equivalent of you telling them they're incompetent and that you don't believe that they could handle disappointment. So really, it's actually showing them more respect to say, no, I can't do this, and I trust that you'll be able to deal with the consequences or find a replacement. So I want those in the room who are people pleasers to really hold on to that. Yeah, because this is just hard. And what's so beautiful about today is that it's hard to deny that you're not alone. You are not alone in hard. There's a whole bunch of people in this room who know what it's like when it gets hard. And I really do think it's about starting to build your life in the way that you want it to look, and not just looking at what everyone's best selves look like out there. And it still kind of awful at the end of the day, right? Like, welcome to the club you never wanted to be a part of. Because it's still hard, and it's still completely not fair. There is no fairness in any of it. It does make things more complicated. You have to think more about everything. You have to rally more. And there will inevitably people who say really, really unfortunate things and do really, really unfortunate things and not show up for you in the way that you deserve. So I have a bit of a proposal. It's something that I am a big fan of, and it's something that I often like to propose to a lot of the people that I get to work with and also use in my everyday life. And I'm still trying to sort of convince my kids to buy into it. So what if we redefine success? Because there's a certain level of knowing that you can do everything right. You can eat right, you can exercise, you can have all the social events that are just really nourishing, and you can do it all. And that doesn't mean that you won't, down the road, need a transplant or have a bad day or have pain or have fatigue. So what if we talk and think about health is more than just the absence of pathology or the absence of pain or the absence of fatigue? What if it's also about the presence of something you love? We spend so much energy trying to get rid of the stuff we don't like. Could we just open up a little bit of that energy and move it towards, okay, what is worth rallying for? Not rallying indiscriminately, but choosing what is worth it so that you can just engage in life. And I'm not going to say this makes it easy, because I actually don't think it makes it easy. I just think it makes it more worth it, right? I often use, and I will use this one example because it'll make me look like a great parent, and I promise you I am cherry picking here. An example I give of what this means is at the cottage, my daughter on the dock, afraid to jump in the water. She got her floaties on and everything. And then her brother jumps in first, and she was too scared. And he's my son's the sweetest. He's the sweet, gentle child, and was trying to be so encouraging, get her to come in, and she was not having it. And then at one point, I stayed out of it at that point, and then I just heard her at one point say, "Hi, scared. Okay, let's go jump in together." Asked her brother to open his arms and then jumped in his arms. And the reason why that, to me, was such a beautiful moment was because she didn't do something scary for the sake of doing something scary. She just decided that her brother was worth feeling scared to jump in towards. And I think it's a simple example, but ultimately really illustrates the point, is deciding what are those moments that are worth being scared for and doing anyway. And getting to know what those small moments are, not just those big ones. So, consider asking yourself, what would you be doing if you weren't in pain, if you didn't have a diagnosis, what would you be doing? Or if you didn't worry, what would you do? And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out and do that thing right now, but I think it'll give you a little bit of a clue as into, what are those things that matter? And oftentimes I ask people what matters, and often people will say my family, my friends, and those are beautiful things. And the way that I think about it is those are areas of your life in which you want to show up in a certain way. So it's but how do you want to show up for your family? And how do you want to show up for your friends or work or hobbies or sports? So I think about this in terms of, I like to think of it as qualities. And say you wanted to be someone who showed up with a sense of courage or bravery. That's great if you knew that that's how you want to lead. Okay, so you can swim with sharks. Wonderful. Check that off the list, but you're still not done. There's more brave, there's more courageous things you can do, right? I can come up here, I'm an anxious public speaker, throw in a microphone, it's 10 times worse. But I'll tell you this, it's worth it to me to sit here with my inner monologue telling me how it's not landing and it's not good and I'm not funny and like charming enough, and have my heart racing. And also stand here and know that I actually feel really passionate about helping folks who are living with chronic disease, and that really matters to me. So it's worth coming here and doing anyway. And I'm not going to be done after I talk. I've done this talk. There's still more to be done. And I think identifying some of those qualities that matter to you can really help guide decision making, because 9.5 times out of 10, the answer is it depends. Right? So if you have at least a sense of what truly matters to you and how you want to show up, it can be helpful. Another way to think about this is if you were to accidentally walk into a room and people didn't realize you were there, and someone who you cared about was describing you to someone who didn't know you. If you thought about that description, I don't want you to think about what you think they would say or what they should say or what you think is true. What would be that thing that would make you sit and go, oh my God, they think that about me? Like what's that? What's that descriptor? And start from there and use that as your North Star. I'll also say, this might sound simple. I like to keep things simple. Does not mean it's easy. I think sometimes the simplest things can be the toughest. So I'll leave everyone with that and just say thank you, and I know we'll have time for questions afterwards.
Wow. I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about here. So we have run a little bit over. So I think what I'm going to suggest we do is we're going to continue with our Q&A for the next 10 minutes. But if anybody would like to get up, stretch their legs, use the washroom, there are snacks out there. Please just come and go at will. But I would hate to miss the opportunity to engage with these two speakers. So if you guys could please come up. I'd like to introduce our moderator. That's Barbara Moore. Barb Raymore is a community volunteer, and she is a nurse who has a background in critical care, over 40 years of experience, and her involvement with the PSC community began in early 2018. Her daughter was diagnosed in 2017 with PSC, and she had a living donor transplant in 2021, and her brother was her donor. So Barb, come on up.
Okay, hi. Oh, okay. Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the first one is for Dr. Selzner. In your experience, is there something you notice transplant patients are unprepared for post-surgery? For example, recovery, pain, emotional impact. Oh, there you are, sorry.
I'm here. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I do believe that there are things that we probably are not able to explain the best we can for the recipient. There is no doubt about it. And so is for the donor, I think. You know, it's very hard to relate to someone what level of pain you will have after surgery, because everyone's tolerance to pain is different. I do see donors and recipients that, you know, doing very well at day 2, have no pain, at day 5, no pain. And we have patients who have pain, unfortunately, several weeks or months later. So we do the best we can, but definitively, and I think emotional impact certainly is something that we can all do better, because I don't think we do enough on that level, on that front, for sure.
I would add, too, even for the emotional impact, the steroids. You know, anybody who's been transplanted, even if you're feeling, you know, if your pain's good, you're progressing, there's no issues. Sorry, but the steroids, of course, they have to give you for anti-rejection. You're just right over. I mean, it's just, you know, so that's just one simple thing that happens, too. Okay, and this is anonymous. My husband and I have so much trauma from navigating our health system. Doctors don't always believe his pain or believe that he's experiencing. It's exhausting. Is that for both, probably?
Well, I was about to say just yes.
Yes.
It is, and I'm a psychologist. I should be able to tell you, okay, this is how you get mental health care. But truth be told, I will say this: for families or young adults, I think it's under 30. Don't quote me; it might be younger than that. The Sunnybrook Family Navigation Program, their whole mandate is to help people get connected to mental health services, whether that's for pay or OHIP covered.
Is that only in Toronto or all across Ontario?
It's sort of, I'm going to say GTA-ish, because I think they'll try. So I haven't reached out to them, but I thought to myself, like, even calling them and asking them, okay, well, what do the rest of us do?
Yeah.
Right? So I think, but what I would say is in the search, just asking the question of, it doesn't necessarily need to be a health psychologist or a social worker who works in medical settings, even just asking, do you have any experience? Are you comfortable working with people with chronic disease?
I'll go to, does the Toronto Transplant Centre support all liver transplant patients in Canada or only Toronto, Ontario?
Yeah, so the Transplant Center in Toronto supports the patients that are in Ontario. However, not all the provinces offer the option of living donor liver transplantation. And because of that, we are supporting patients and families who are from all provinces that do not offer living donation, which is majority of the provinces. So if someone has a living donor and has indication, obviously, for transplant that is accepted in our program, we do look at offering them living donation. But otherwise, when it comes to cadaveric transplant, is only supporting Ontario population, because every province have their own transplant program.
Any resources available for those who can't afford mental health care?
There are some. If I'm being honest, I would go to your family doctor to see what's more local, because I think they would have a better pulse on what's locally available. I know there are some avenues, especially that were set up through COVID, where there are some connections that can be made if you, I'm trying to think if it's the College of, I think it's the Ontario Psychological Association. I can loop back and try to find the ways to do it, but yeah, I'm a psychologist and I still don't know the answer because it's actually that complicated.
Yeah.
But that's what I would look at. There were some CBT programs that were available, and I think they've been extended.
So basically start at ground zero, go to your family physician and,
As the first,
as your first. Okay. What's being done to better support transplantees pre and post transplant? I was assigned someone I was told would help me mentally nice. Be mentally prepared, but only met once.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's come to the same thing. I do believe that we need to do better. The problem is always a question of resources and what resources we have available and how we can channel those limited resources toward where the need is the most. And that's all I can say, unfortunately, for that answer. And I don't know, in terms of preparation for mental health, why the meeting was just once. Was that one time enough, or was there any lack in follow-up? And if that would be the case, I really suggest that you recontact the program and say, we needed to have that follow-up, didn't take place.
Yeah. The one thing that I will just highlight, and this is that in my experience, folks who need to go through something really difficult or traumatic, those who have really good social supports in place tend to weather the storms a little easier because they have people who they can rely on and they can open up to. Going back to the brain's wired to survive and socialize, like if you're in survival mode, the best place to be is with your people that you feel safe with.
What, honey, just one more question? How many? Yes, that's. Or which one would you prefer? The recurrent. Okay, how can the living donor be from outside of Canada? If yes, how is their costs covered?
I think that is a
I think I
very
just
good
lost that.
question. Yes, the question was, can the living donor be outside Canada, and how do we cover the cost? Yes, absolutely. The living donor can be coming from outside Canada. That option totally exists. The cost is covered through the OHIP, insurance of the recipient. The only issue is that we have to be very careful about where these donors are coming from, because it's important to understand that the donor have to be, in those cases, very close family member, ensuring that there is, in fact, a relation. And sometimes working up these donors from distance is very, very challenging. And we often end up asking them to come to Toronto and redo all the scans, etc. We start with some groundwork out from where they are located, but it becomes challenging. So I think outside Canada, North America is yes, definitively. When it comes much further away, it becomes complex, but certainly something we have done and we can do.